Hello, impressive human beings, and welcome to Live Your Impressivity TV show. In today's episode, I'm going to share with you an interview with Rachel Kelly, author, speaker, and mental health activist in the UK. She is the author of many books, and two of them are very dear to my heart. One of them is Black Rainbow, and the other one is called Walking on Sunshine, and I'm going to post the links under the video. And I had this interview with Rachel back in 2017 when I was doing the research for my book. And I feel that it is still very, very relevant because in our conversation we talk about how to overcome depression with the tools of mindfulness and writing. And especially if you're going through this, or maybe you have someone who is going through this in your family or among your friends, then I recommend you to listen to this audio interview and to share it with people who might benefit from it. And also, please let us know in the comments below how you feel about using these tools of breathing, mindfulness, and writing in your journey. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel because I share new content every Tuesday, and I'm super excited to bring you more relevant content, especially during this time. So I hope you're well, I hope you're safe, take care, and keep watching this audio interview. Lots of love. I mentioned first the Walking on Sunshine, although it's a little bit backwards, but I was very impressed the first time when I read Walking on Sunshine, and what really captured me was the way you speak about the mindfulness and how it connects, how you are connected with mindfulness through small daily activities. And the image that really stuck with me was the activity of washing your hands and really feeling the water and smelling the soap and hearing the splash of the water. And actually it's an image that really stuck with me, and I was using it as an example in one of my workshops, and everyone was like, wow, how can such an insignificant activity that we're doing every day can be so powerful and can ground us? So yeah, actually my first question would be, when it comes to writing, how would you describe it in relation to mindfulness?
Writing in relation to mindfulness. That's so interesting. Yes, I mean, I suppose I find both of them relaxing in the sense that they require you to be in the moment and to concentrate and to be focused. And I suppose one element of mindfulness that I particularly like is that sense that so often we're in several places all at once. And I think Jon Kabat-Zinn, who I'm sure you know is like one of the founders of mindfulness, said he felt, or even has done some research, which is that at least 50% of our attention is often on something else rather than just focused on what we're doing. And I think writing requires focus to think clearly and to express that clearly and to express it in a way that is the best way that we can express it. So I suppose for me there is a big link between the two, and I suppose in a way I got to writing first and mindfulness second, but now you mention it, that I hadn't thought it through, but there is definitely a huge connection. And I suppose with me, for writing, there's both the act of writing, but there's also the act of reading somebody else's writing. And I think that connection with mindfulness was very startling to me, especially reading poetry, because poetry really does require you to be in the moment, to unpack meaning. You know, it's deliberately a very concentrated kind of writing. And I think that's probably, for me, the most kind of connected, the strongest connection between mindfulness and writing would come in poetry. Robert Frost said that poetry was a stay against confusion. And I love that idea, that it's a way of stopping confusion and being present.
Wow, yeah, that sounds so beautiful. So staying a little bit on the topic of mindfulness, in the middle of your busy life, what other mindfulness activities do you find most grounding?
Well, I probably use the breathing exercises the most. I really use them an awful lot. Probably the one I use the most is the 3-step breathing exercise. You probably know that, which is when you become aware of your breathing, you become aware of your thoughts, you become aware of your heart rate, you bring your focus inwards, and then the second step is you become accepting of those thoughts. And then there's a lovely line about just let the thoughts go like leaves floating down a stream. You don't try and change anything. You don't try and change your thoughts, your breath, or your breathing, or your heart. You just accept everything. That's the second step. And then the third step is you focus outwards once again. And there's a lovely line in the third step of that exercise. Is about I always say it to myself, and this might be the moment at which you might turn your thoughts to others, and that's before you kind of go back outwards again. So I love that breathing exercise, the 3-step breathing exercise. It's very at the heart of mindfulness. I use that one a lot. That's almost when I can stop, maybe at home. I think when I'm working or I'm out and about, then the breathing exercise, again, another one, a mindful one is sort of the out breath being longer than the in breath. So you breathe in and then you breathe out for longer. The 7-11 one, so roughly you breathe in for 7 and you breathe out for 11. I don't always quite manage those ratios, but I think that would be a second one. I mean, I suppose the thing about breathing, and this might sound really obvious, but I remember it was a real light bulb for me, which is that you can't breathe in the future, you can't breathe in the past, you can only breathe now. So it's a lovely way of coming back to the present moment and getting back into that awareness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, for me as well, it was a major moment when I actually learned how to properly breathe, because someone told me, breathing seems something very natural that comes natural to all of us, but in fact we're not breathing correctly. And for me it was like, wow, what do you mean? So
yeah, I totally agree. And sportsmen learn how to breathe, actors learn how to breathe. And I think the other aspect of it, which was a real revelation, and again, once you know it, it's very simple, but the idea that sometimes we can't necessarily fix our heads or relax our minds, but if we physically relax, we automatically become mentally relaxed. And I love that idea that we can fix the problem the other way around, which is sort of come from our bodies through to our heads.
Absolutely. That's incredible. So also on the topic of writing, and given your background as a journalist, were you thinking when you were working in media, did you ever see writing as therapeutic, or was it just part of the job, and that was just a way of writing and you enjoyed it, but you never thought of it as therapeutic, or maybe it was already something that you would consider as a way of releasing your emotions?
That's really interesting. I mean, funnily enough, I was drawn to writing about therapy. I was interested in alternative health, and I was interested in a holistic approach to well-being, and I knew that I was stressed in the newsroom at the Times, and I think writing at quite high speed in the newsroom was not therapeutic or relaxing really, but I was drawn to the subject matter of therapy, to the subject matter of kind of holistic approach to well-being. So I did actually write a column at the Times called Alternatively Thinking, and I used to go and interview people, and I remember going to interview people, and I think that was the first time when I thought, actually, I could think about writing in a very different way. It wasn't just about writing a news story at high speed. The requirement to try and understand some of the therapeutic approaches in a way then fed into a new look at writing, which was that the writing in itself could be part of trying to understand what was happening. So I think that's sort of how it happened, sort of a slightly roundabout way in a way, was it sort of started with the subject matter, and then being exposed to people in this field and, you know, how they looked at life in a very different way, that helped me think, well, maybe I could look at writing in a different way.
Right, yeah. And now they ended up combining each other and in a really beautiful way, I have to say.
Yes, yes. And I think what happened was when I was very, very ill, I did naturally want to write down what was happening. When I was writing my memoir, I mean, I had sort of doctor's records, and I had some letters, and I had snatches of diaries, and I had a strong first instinct, which was that somehow these were very, very dark times, but by writing them down, they weren't going completely to waste. Because I think when you're in a deep and profound depression, you feel, I remember feeling a terrible sense of a waste. You know, everything was wasted. I couldn't be my normal self. And I did have an instinct to write. And I think that was the beginning of using it very directly in a therapeutic way. And then after the second breakdown, I had a lot of therapy, and I worked with a therapist for 2 years, and she really encouraged me to write more and to write myself letters and to write through some of the difficult feelings, and, you know, particularly around anger, which is a very common issue for people who suffer from depression. This idea that anger is, you know, depression is anger turned in, and writing about anger and things that had been frightening. And I think the classic is that men find it hard to talk or write about vulnerability, and women find it hard to write or talk about anger. And that was quite a breakthrough, which was why writing, it became less frightening.
Yeah, that's very true. And now that you mentioned this, I remember that I read, I spotted in Black Rainbow the writing exercise that you mentioned about thoughts record. And I think that's a really great way to start becoming aware of that inner voice, and to start replacing it with more kind thoughts. And this also reminded me of one of the exercises that my therapist recommended to me while I was attending sessions, and it was to write down the situation and the thoughts and the feelings and how they all connect. And again, that was also something that I wouldn't have been aware of. So as soon as I started writing it down, I realized how everything gets triggered, and all the feelings and everything, body sensations and all the emotions get triggered by some thoughts that we may not even be consciously aware of, but they are there. So I think that's really powerful. And you mentioned some of these other exercises. Did you use journaling or any other writing prompts?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just back to CBT and the cognitive behavioral therapy stuff, I absolutely found that incredibly helpful. That was separate to working one-on-one with a therapist, but as you absolutely, as you say, the sort of classic, you know, something happens, I don't know, so somebody sort of cuts you dead in the street, and you think, oh, they don't like me, and then you quickly catastrophize and think, I don't have any friends, and you know, and then by unpacking that and writing it down, and then looking at your assumptions and questioning them and thinking, well, maybe something, you know, maybe their mother's not very well, or maybe they didn't see you, and looking how harsh, as you say, that kind of language you use to yourself, and how you make so many assumptions. And I think the key insight is that a thought is a thought. You know, I know that sounds really obvious, but it's like, it's not a fact. It's how you think about something. So it's how you respond to these things, as opposed to the truth. And again, as you rightly say, so many of those things are wrapped together. So the thought, the emotion, and the event, you know, can all, and those bodily feelings and the fear, flight, or fright response can just trigger so quickly. And writing's a way of unpacking that. Yeah, and then yeah, as you say, in additioning, yeah, I absolutely. So I was very influenced by I think it's Julia Cameron, who has a book called The Artist's Way. I don't know if you've come across that. And she has a thing around journaling, and she has a thing about particularly first thing in the morning, just to write down your thoughts in a stream of consciousness. And I found that very helpful, because you probably know that a lot of people who suffer from anxiety and low mood, they're at their most anxious in the morning. and they kind of get better as the day goes on. But there's a kind of cortisol spike, which is kind of a good thing because it gets us up. But if you're quite anxious, that can sometimes be really hard in the morning. And I remember that sort of sign of recovery was being able to sort of find it a little bit easier in the morning. And I think, again, you know, fear, anger, these difficult things, you know, writing them down can really help. And I did start using that journaling, especially first thing in the morning. I think the other thing I did is I keep a gratitude journal, and you know, I note down the good things that have happened in the day. You know, 3 good things that have happened in the day. Actually, on a good day, I can get to about 20. On a bad day, I can normally get around to 11 or 12. I mean, it's really interesting. It's like a muscle. And again, you know, the requirement to write them down helps strengthen that muscle. And it's very pleasurable. I have all these kind of Liberty notebooks, which I've written down all these thoughts. And actually, that's another point, I think, why writing can be so helpful, is that we do then have a record. And both sorts of records are useful. So the gratitude record can be really useful to sort of look back and all the things you've enjoyed and all the things you appreciated, but also the kind of, you might call it the fear record or some of the CBT records. I found it really useful to write down what I thought was the problem, and then so often it turned out it wasn't a problem.
Yeah, that's very true. That's really
yeah.
And yeah, I mean, also exactly as you mentioned, keeping those records, it helps people see how they change over time, and how they get to cope with the situation when maybe at a certain point they write about it and they feel nervous or angry, and then later on they realize, oh, this actually didn't turn out to be such a bad thing, and it perhaps became a positive, it had a positive outcome at the end of the day. So I think it's really important to keep this record. So it's definitely powerful.
I completely agree. I mean, so often your imagination, and I haven't seen data on this, but I imagine it may be true that there's possibility that you may have more of a propensity to anxiety if you're on the more sensitive side, and so you can quite often feel you know, frightened or affronted or overwhelmed when actually the situation wasn't nearly so bad in reality.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's really true.
Yeah.
So for someone who goes through this healing process and they're recovering either from a trauma or they're going through depression and anxiety, at which stage would you recommend writing to come into play? Would it be closer to when they realize that they're going through a tough time, or later on?
Well, I think in my case, I did, you know, being a writer by trade and having trained as a journalist and having always kept diaries and always written, really. I mean, I never didn't write. So, I mean, for me, I was always going to do snatches and, as I say, bits of diaries and letters, even when I was quite unwell. I think the breakthrough for me was it did have to wait till I started to get better. I think that was because, I suppose, the real spur, in a way, to writing Black Rainbow, I mean, there were lots of different motivations there, but I think I had a very strong sense that I didn't want to waste what had happened to me, and I did want to share this message of hope that, you know, outcomes are quite good. People do recover, and there are ways to recover. And I really felt, you know, I'd gone on this horrible journey, but maybe someone was out there, and I was just a little bit ahead on the road, but I had come through, and I could see some light on the tunnel. And it was sort of like, look, anybody behind me who's still really struggling, you know what, things do get better. And here are some things to hold on to. There's a wonderful Anne Sexton poem that has this line, American poet, very sadly she did commit suicide, but she has this line, I had to have something to hold on to, and she writes it in her poem, this terrifying sense of falling. And I think I had a feeling with Black Rainbow, look, I'm throwing back a lifeline, here's something to hold on to. You know, it's not just my story, but I'm sharing some of the really greats through literature who've been in such dark places, but yet, you know, people do recover, they do get better. And, you know, maybe this is something to hold on to is if you're going through this.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think you also touched on an important topic that I also mention in my book, because I find that writing is therapeutic for the person who writes, but at the same time, when we get to share it with the other people who are going through similar situations, then it's also a therapy for them, because they realize that they're not alone and they are going through this journey that may seem that has no end. But if someone says, look, I've been there and it's okay, it's gonna be better, then they realize, well, this is actually not so bad and I'm not alone in this. So I think, this is really, really important.
Yeah, you put your finger on it. And I think, you know, one of the things that was so wonderful after Black Rainbow was people getting in touch saying, you know, I was there too, you know, I love it. I don't feel so alone now. You know, I love the fact that you're sharing that, you know, how difficult and horrible it is, but equally, you know, there is hope. And I think that feeling of isolation and being alone, you know, it's so powerful in depression. Sometimes I think depression really just is all about isolation. You feel so disconnected. And so I think that, you know, writing can reach you when sometimes your family can't reach you, your friends can't reach you, but somebody else who's had that shared experience. And we do know from some of the research and data that actually, you know, peer-to-peer support in that way is really powerful. So if you have a traumatized soldier, the best person to talk to a traumatized soldier is another traumatized soldier. So I think there is something very strong about that shared experience and not feeling so alone. And you know, and I was just so lovely for me, because you know, I suppose when something like that happens to you, you sometimes think, well, did I make this all up? You know, did this really happen? Was it really like that? And then people get in touch and say, you described it exactly how it happened to me. And you think, oh, phew, you know, yeah, it really happened.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah,
and last but not least, there are people who are a little bit reluctant when they hear about using writing for expressing their feelings, and it might be either out of fear or maybe other blocks that they're having. What would be your advice for someone who's not really open to the idea of writing, and how would you recommend them to start?
That's really interesting. I mean, I think it is true that you know, just as depression or low mood anxiety, it does present in different ways at different people. And I also think that finding strategies to help are also different for different people. I was working with a therapist the other day who does a lot of play therapy, and she was talking about how play can be a very useful way to express difficult feelings. Is even within, like, you know, you can know more about someone playing an hour of Monopoly than you can in probably 10 years of being polite, whatever. So she was saying how that can be a powerful way of helping people find out a little bit more about their strong feelings. So I suppose, you know, I think to be aware of that context and to be aware that different people do find different things helpful. I think with the writing thing, I think we have to sort of get over some of the stuff we learned at school, which I think I was lucky, particularly on poetry. I didn't study English at university. I came to poetry and the great literature really as a tool, a wonderful thing that could help us and be our friend. And it wasn't like it was scary or that I was intimidated. These writers were like friends, as I was like holding hands with them. And I think there's something there about writing, as people feel intimidated. They think it's you have to be a great writer, you know, you have to somehow I don't know, you know, you sort of compare yourself with, I don't know, all the amazing writers through the literary canon and, I don't know, even Shakespeare, whatever. But actually writing can actually just be about developing this kindlier and friendlier voice in your head. And I think if you sort of strip away your prejudices from school and university and all the other writers and just think, how does this really speak to me? You know, like you're finding another friend, like you're finding a kindly voice, you know, a self-compassionate voice, like a friendly voice, and seeing on paper how you think about yourself, how you think about those feelings. Like, you know, sometimes it's so harsh what we write down, you know, like I'm not good enough, or I really mucked that up, or, and it's so interesting. I think writing is just like an incredible mirror in a very loving and nurturing way. If it's used in the right way, it doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be about being published or famous writers or what you learned at school. It can just be your friend in time of need.
Absolutely. Wow, you put it in such a beautiful way. Writing is a mirror, indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is something that I really hope that many people will see it as a friendly way to express themselves and to look at themselves in this mirror in a way that they get to speak to themselves with a friendlier voice.
Completely. We're hashtag same page.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and I love what you're doing, because I think you're right. There are barriers. People do feel intimidated, and they kind of associate it with frightening stuff and school and famous people, and it doesn't have to be any of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.